Good morning. This is Donna Householder with Community Connections. I'd like to welcome you to the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act Subaward Reporting System webinar for CDBG grantees. A few ground rules for participating in the webinar. The call will last approximately 1 hour. All callers are muted due to the high number of participants. The slides are posted on the Community Connections website, and the webinar will be recorded for future use and made available for viewing and downloading. If you are having audio difficulties, please use the telephone instead of your computer. If you have questions, you are welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the questions function on the GoToWebinar toolbar. A resource advisor will forward some questions to presenters to answer at the end of the webinar. If your question is not answered, we will be developing a question and answer resource that will be posted on the website. I'm now turning the presentation over to the Office of Block Grant Assistance.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CDBG webinar on the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act Subaward Reporting System. My name is Diane Labasso, and I'm joined by my colleague, Karen Pierce. We are from the Office of Block Grant Assistance, and our office has oversight responsibilities for, among other things, the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and the Disaster Recovery Program. Over the next hour, we will explain, to the best of our knowledge, the SSRS system. Please understand, as you listen to this webinar, that this system was just released on Friday, and it was actually at COB on Friday, so we didn't really get a whole day, but Friday at COB, and prior to that point, there wasn't even an opportunity to test the system. The only training opportunities that have occurred so far have been made available solely through OMB/GSA. GSA is the administrator for the SSRS system via their October webinars. OMB is still working out the finer points of the system and is still providing agencies with guidance. We, in the Office of Block Grant Assistance, wanted to provide you with all the information that we have to date. Again, please understand that we're learning right along with you, and our goal was just to convey what we know at this point to try to give you a head start. Keep in mind also that our presentation is not going to focus on the technical aspects of the SSRS system. We're going to be talking about which grantees need to report and under what circumstances. There's plenty, again, that we do not know right now. As was stated by the organizer, we're going to be posting commonly asked questions and answers on our website, and these slides will be posted for viewing at a later time. Stay tuned, as I'm sure this is one of the many training sessions on this topic. The format of the presentation today is that I will talk for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we will give you an opportunity to submit questions by email. Karen Pierce and I will respond to the questions to the best of our ability. If for some reason your question is not answered, we will capture the question and include it in a question and answer document that we will make available on the web. Due to the high number of participants, it is not practical to take live phone calls during this webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to provide an overview of the webinar. During this webinar, we will discuss the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act of 2006, SSRS, and USA spending, and how these all fit together. We will provide you with some definitions so that everyone is on the same page as to what OMB's terms mean with regard to CDBG. We will then get to the heart of the presentation, describing to you what the new reporting requirements are, who has to report and when, through what system and how often, and how this affects other systems such as IDIS. We will then move on to the data elements and how you might be able to reduce your reporting burden to the greatest extent possible. Then we will remind you on how to get more information and take your email questions. The Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act was signed in September of 2006. The Act requires information on federal awards be made available to the public via a single searchable website. Federal awards include grants, subgrants, loans, cooperative agreements, and other forms of financial assistance. This FFATA might sound familiar to you, as it should. CDBG and other programs have required grantees to obtain DUNS numbers to identify these federal awards. And if the grantees receive recovery funds, CDBG-R and NSP2, grantees were required to obtain a central contractor registry. Also, the CDBG program modified IDIS to collect DUNS numbers from our grantees that make awards to subordinate organizations. So none of this discussion here about DUNS numbers and CCR should be foreign to you. It should be something you're familiar with. We're just going to take it a step further with SSRS. In addition to identification via the DUNS and CCR numbers, the legislation, the FFATA legislation, required OMB to maintain a centralized sub-award reporting system that contains information on all federal spending awards, including executive compensation information. This system is FSRS. FSRS is similar to the system for recovery programs called federalreporting.gov. So we're just trying to show you that these systems are similar, and we'll get into the differences in just a moment. Federalreporting.gov captures, among other things, information on subawardees. FSRS will do the same for non-recovery programs. The information in FSRS will be made available to the public on usaspending.gov. Before we go any further, let me stop here and mention that this requirement to enter data into FSRS in no way replaces the need to enter information into IDIS. Entering information into IDIS is critical and supports continued funding for our program. Okay, I'd like to go over a few definitions at this point. To make sure that everyone is on the same page, we're going to start with a few definitions. It is important to understand which particular entity we are talking about throughout this presentation. The reason we wanted to put this rather basic slide up there is because there's a lot of guidance presented on the OMB site and on the FSRS site, and they have some very generic terms, and we wanted to break it down to you to hopefully make it easier to understand. Let's start with prime awardee. The prime awardee is the entity receiving grant funding from the federal agency, in this case HUD. For the CDBG entitlement program, these are the metropolitan cities and urban counties that receive money directly from HUD. For the state CDBG program, these are the states. For the insular area program, these are the insulars. For NSP3, these are the states, entitlements or non-entitlements that receive money directly from HUD. Same with the disaster recovery program, the states or the entitlements that receive money directly from HUD. You will note the next item we see here is applicable grant program. You will note that we list CDBG, NSP3, and disaster recovery. This list represents nearly 100% of the grantees that will be required to report. But keep in mind there could be a couple of exceptions. We'll discuss these in a few minutes. Subaward. A subaward is simply an instrument to provide support for the performance of a project or activity. It is awarded to an entity which will help carry out the functions of a grantee. An entitlement community awarding funds to a nonprofit organization to help carry out a housing program is a subawardee or a subrecipient. Should the entitlement community provide funds for assistance to a business this would not be considered a subaward as the business is a beneficiary of the CDBG funds. This business is not helping to carry out the work of the prime awardee. Next important point, you will see where it says first tier subaward. A first tier subaward is exactly what it sounds like, an award one level down below the prime awardee. All units of general local government funded by the state in the state CDBG program are first tier subawards. This distinction about first tier is very important because at this time the requirement is only on first tier subawards. However, reading the Federal Register and the other OMB guidance seems to hint at the fact that this could expand at some point. But right now we're only talking about first tier subawards. The other thing to realize when you look at this definition on first tier subawards, the first word that you see there is grant. We're talking about grants here. Should an entitlement community enter into a contract or procurement action as the first tier, no reporting is necessary. Should the state, in the state CDBG program, award its 1% technical assistance set-aside money via a procurement action, no reporting will be necessary. So let's just take a few moments now to move on to the affected grantees. The SSRS system applies to all federal grants, but this webinar will only focus on, again, CDBG, NSP3, and disaster recovery grants. This slide, again, is one of the most important slides in the presentation, so please listen carefully on who is required to report. There are three threshold factors to keep in mind. The reporting requirements and the use of the SSRS system applies only to 1. Grants awarded after October 1st, 2010. Only to non-ARA grants. Again, no, we're not talking about CDBGR, NSP, TA, or NSP2 are excluded from this reporting system. And only to grantees with subawards exceeding $25,000. So again, a grant awarded to a prime awardee after October 1st, 2010, only to non-ARA grants, grantees, and only to grantees with subawards exceeding $25,000. Note this October 1, 2010 date has nothing to do with a program year start date. If the grant was fully executed by HUD, meaning that HUD and the prime awardee have both signed after October 1st, 2010, reporting is required. If there are new monies attached to a program, such as the Disaster Recovery Enhancement Fund or other funding where there's brand new money attached, at this point we think that these grantees will be covered, and we will provide guidance on that going forward. But any type of new money action after October 1st, 2010, reporting is required. Again, ARA grantees are excluded, and the final point, only first-tier subaward in the form of a grant and exceeding $25,000 or more. Are there any exceptions to this? Any exceptions to the reporting requirements? As a matter of fact, there are. First, awards to individuals are not covered. Second, subawards that are more of a beneficiary arrangement rather than a subawards of the first tier down is a beneficiary of CDBG money, it's not covered. So entitlement provides funds to assist a business. That is not covered under this system. Classified information, not really that relevant to our programs, but that is excluded. And if the prime awardee has a gross income from all sources equaling $300,000 or less in the previous tax year, they would be excluded. A couple of quick things about the subaward. If the subaward was made for $25,000 and that amount was later reduced, reporting is still required. So there's no provision for making an award and then reducing it to get underneath the $25,000. Reporting is still required. Likewise, a subgrant of less than $25,000 that was increased to $25,000 or more must report. Now we will move on to the time frames. The SSRS system was launched on October 29, 2010, and grantees that meet the criteria to report, again, with those with grants fully executed after October 1st, 2010, on or after, will begin reporting on all subawards retroactive to October 1st, 2010. Grantees will have until the end of the next month to report on subaward information. And there's a quick little example up there. If a subaward was made on October 15th, the grantee has until November 30th to report the subaward information. Now we will move on to the data elements that are needed to complete the report. A few important points here. Only prime awardees will be able to enter data. This is a change from federalreporting.gov. In federalreporting.gov, the prime awardee could delegate the data entry function to a subawardee or subrecipient. This is not permitted in FSRS. Our experience in the CDBG program has been that the grantees are not delegating this function even in federal reporting, but it is not permitted at all in FSRS. Second point, some data elements will be pre-populated from HUD's file or from the Central Contractor Registry. Which brings us to a few reminders. All grantees need a DUNS number to get a CCR, and CCR registrations expire. They only remain active for a year. So grantees, and in working with sub-awardees, need to keep those things in mind. The CCR registrations do expire and they need to be kept active. And we'll talk about in just a few moments why it is so important for all sub-awardees to have a CCR registration. Due to the requirements of federalreporting.gov, all CDBG grantees have DUNS numbers and CCR numbers. Since disaster recovery grantees are CDBG grantees, the same holds true. But for the NSP3 program, some of the non-entitlement grantees may not have DUNS or CCR numbers, and these particular grantees should obtain these numbers as soon as possible. So we have covered the prime awardees, but what about the subawards? Remember, we are only concerned with grants and only with first-tier reporting. CDBG over the past few years CDBG made changes to IDIS, which required the collection of the subawardee's DUNS number. If you haven't done so already, with your subawardees, you should require that they make DUNS number and also register and maintain a CCR registration. Just so that all of our audience understands, there's a requirement in the Federal Register that all CDBG, NSP3, and disaster recovery, actually it's all grantees, all grants executed after October 1st, there has to be a language in the grant agreements requiring DUNS numbers, CCR registrations, and compliance with FFATA. So all of our prime awardees are going to have a grant condition requiring these three items. And we encourage you, as our prime grantees, to require the same from your subawardees. And when we go further in the presentation and talk about the data that will be pre-populated, you'll see why that makes a lot of sense. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the specific SSRS data elements so that you can get a feel for what this particular system is requesting. The data elements can be broken down into two broad categories: prime awardee data elements and sub-award data elements. Let's start with the prime awardee data elements. What is important to remember is that grantees will only need to enter data that is not transferred by HUD or pulled in from CCR records. Although the data burden can be greatly reduced by requiring subawardees to obtain and maintain a CCR registration, there are still remaining data fields that will need to be completed. The prime awardee will enter information on the following: the grant number, the agency name, obviously HUD, the DUNS number, the prime awardee name, the address. There's also a field that is requiring the congressional district, but that is pretty simple to fill out. Basically, the prime awardee will just enter their zip code and +4, and there's a zip code lookup table. And once the +4 on the zip code is selected, the congressional district will be pre-populated. The CFDA number is another field that will be entered, and the place of performance. There's also a data field called sub-award date, which is the date, the year, and the month of all sub-awards against the prime award. Most of the primary awardee data is anticipated, and I will say anticipated because we're still testing our functionality at this point, to be populated from either HUD's file, HUD's, we call it the FODS file, or from CCR. So we're hoping that a lot of the prime awardee data will come from others, will be generated from other sources within the department, and then will go over from HUD to USA spending, so that when you, as a grantee, go into the SSRS system and enter your DUNS number, a lot of the prime awardee data will already be pre-populated. The exceptions, what we know will not be pre-populated, are the following. The principal place of performance. That is simply the city and the state where you're carrying out your project or your activity. The project description. The project description should be a clear and complete information on the purpose of the award, the scope, and the nature of activities and outcomes. The terms should be clear with no abbreviations. Remember, as we go forward, all of the information in USA spending is going to be available for the public to review. So we want to make sure the descriptions are accurate and clearly describe what is being accomplished with the federal resources. So let me just go back. The exceptions we know will not be pre-filled are principal place of performance, project description, and the date of a sub-award. I want to take just a moment to talk about one of the data elements that OMB has really placed a lot of emphasis on, and that is executive compensation. But before I go through all of the thresholds and exceptions and how it works, I want to couch this in, this is simply another data element. Another data element under prime awardee and a data element under a sub-award. OMB is interested in providing the public with information on highly compensated officials, both for the prime awardee and the sub-awardee. Again, it's just another data element. And the reason I say it like it's just another data element is that if the prime awardee and the sub-awardee obtain and maintain a CCR registration, and we already know that our prime awardees, for the most part, all have them, then this information will transfer over. Now, what OMB is trying to gather here is the compensation levels of the highly compensated officials at the agencies. There's a couple of things to keep in mind. The prime or sub-awardee has to have received 80% or more of the total gross revenue in federal grants and federal money, and has to have had an earnings, a gross revenue level of over $25 million or more. So let's assume that the prime or the sub-awardee meets these thresholds. There's still another way to where you would not have to provide those actual levels of the list of the officers and their compensation level. If that information on those highly compensated officials is available in some other public information, such as SEC reports or IRS reports, then the names and the compensation levels are not going to be required. So just a couple of takeaway points here. There's a dollar threshold, a percentage threshold, a dollar threshold, and an information threshold. If for some reason the prime or the subawardee meets the threshold and the information is not available publicly, then at that point you will have to enter into SSRS, the names and compensation levels of the highly compensated officers of the grantee organization or the subgrantee. But there's a lot of ifs, thens, and if the information is publicly available, it does not have to be reported in FSRS. Okay, we are about 25 minutes into the presentation. In a few minutes, probably about 10 minutes, we will begin answering some of your questions that you're going to be sending in through the chat or email. So just to give you a heads up, if you have questions, let's start sending those in. We're going to continue on for another 10 minutes or so, and then we will take your questions. So we talked a little bit about the prime awardee data elements, and we talked about one particular element that OMB is very interested in, which is executive compensation. Now we're going to move on to the we're going to talk in just a moment about the subawardee data elements, but before we move into the subawardee data elements, you might be curious, as we were, as to what currently is being transferred from HUD's data file to usaspending.gov, which you recall is the searchable database. This slide is an example of data that is currently appearing in usaspending.gov for a CDBG grantee, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. We show you this to give you an opportunity to look at what the data looks like that is transferred by HUD. So let me just go to the next screen here. Okay. So if you look, this is awarded for a 2010 grant, but note the executed date of the grant agreement. In the right hand at the top where it says date signed. That date is August 17, 2010. Therefore, although we're showing you this grant to show you what the data looks like when it gets populated from HUD's database over into usaspending.gov, this particular grantee would not be required to report this year because the date of the executed grant agreement is prior to October 1st, 2010. But we wanted to show you the data that was pre-filled. You'll see the name of the grantee, the grant number, the program source code, the CFDA number, and a description. Now, frankly, we know that level of description that's being transferred over is not going to be sufficient based on what we're hearing from OMB. Again, the description needs to be a concise description on activities, outcomes, and what you've done with the CDBG money. So we will be providing in our Q&A the exact information that needs to go into the project description field. But this is how the data looks at this point. If someone wanted to go into USA Spending and search on their grant award number, you'd be able to see what kind of information is being transferred over at this point. All right, so we talked about prime elements. We talked about executive compensation, which is a prime and a subawardee data element. We showed you what the screenshots look like in USA Spending at this point. Now we're going to talk about the SSRS data elements for subawardees. What is important to remember, and I know I've said this before, but the only information that the grantee will need to enter is data that is not transferred by HUD or pulled in from CCR records. Just to expand further on the whole issue of CCR registrations and for your subawardees, OMB is not mandating that subawardees have a CCR registration. However, if you have been listening to what we've been trying to present here, you'll see that your data burden will be greatly reduced by requiring that your subawardees have CCR registration. So I would highly suggest that you require that and perhaps even put it in your grant agreement. Again, that is not an OMB requirement. It's not a HUD requirement. But if you think about the amount of data, the amount that it will help you on your on submitting these reports, I think you will see that it makes sense. So, all right, we talked about the data that will come over from CCR will greatly reduce your data burden. Even though the data burden is reduced, the grantees will still, factoring in HUD's data field and information from CCR, will still leave anywhere between 7 and 13 data items that will need to be entered by the prime awardee about the subaward. If the information is not in CCR, the prime awardee will need to enter the name and address of the subaward, plus the congressional district that will be pre-populated from the zip code file, the DUNS number, the amount of the subaward, the award date, the award number, the principal place of performance. So how does this all fit together? How do prime awardees get their data and submit the report? First and foremost, get a DUNS number. And as we stated previously, all of the CDBG grantees, all of the disaster recovery grantees, and the majority of the NSP3 grantees already have a DUNS number as well as a CCR number. If you are an NSP3 grantee, particularly a non-entitlement grantee who has not received money directly from HUD before, register for a DUNS number and a CCR registration immediately. Keep the CCR registration active. It does expire every year. Consider requiring CCR registration for your subawardees. Once all of that is taken care of, the next step is to access SSRS and register for an account. You will register for an account using the DUNS number that is tied to your locks and your banking that you use for your regular CDBG money. This is the number that will be placed on your grant agreement documents once they're executed, and this will carry over into HUD's FODS file. So what is going to happen from HUD is all of our grant agreements, we will be required to place the DUNS number on the top of the grant agreement as well as a screenshot from CCR. And that is our kind of cross-check that all of our grantees have DUNS numbers and CCRs. So you'll go into FSRS, use your DUNS number, and register for an account. As far as SSRS goes, they will have features for copying data, copying reports forward, similar to federal reporting. And they'll also have an ability to batch upload many reports at once for grantees with large numbers of subawards. And as I said early in the presentation, the purpose of our presentation here at the Office of Block Grant Assistance was not to provide the technical specifications on how to use the FSRS system. OMB USA Spending on its website has several of the webinars. If you've had the opportunity to watch them, that's fantastic. If you haven't, I would suggest the webinars on October 7th and October 28th, with October 28th being a very good one, provide step-by-step instructions for completing the reports and screenshots. I would suggest that you take the time and go into that URL and take a look at those, the instructions on how to use the system. The Office of Block Grant Assistance has developed some questions and answers. We will be adding to those Q&As based on the questions you send in today, and we will be posting those up on the website at a later date. And again, this presentation will also be recorded and archived and placed on the website, and we will be sending out the URL where it will have its final home. I know that at the beginning of the presentation there was a URL. It will be on Community Connections website, but we will end up putting all the materials on our website also. There is a federal service desk for FSRS help for technical specifications on how to enter the data into FSRS. The phone number is 1-866-606-8220. And there's a website at federalservicedesk.gov. Before we begin taking questions, on behalf of the Office of Block Grant Assistance, I want to thank all of you. I know there's been a lot of things that have come up with federal reporting, and I really appreciate all the work you do, and we know how hard everyone's trying to be in compliance with all these requirements. Again, our purpose of this website, of this webinar, was to give you a little bit of a jump, to let you know everything we know. I'm sure we'll be having more webinars on this particular topic, but we wanted to get you some advanced information, to make you feel more comfortable with the system. And with that, I think we're going to begin taking some questions. Karen, do we have a couple of questions to start with?
Yes, we have several great questions from our audience.
Okay. All right. So the first question we have here is from Bradley. I guess we're not sharing last names, which is probably good. Bradley asks, will this requirement for FFATA apply to home, ESG, and HOPWA? The answer is yes. FFATA requirements will apply to all federal grants across federal agencies. And again, our presentation was based on the CDBG program, but depending on the triggers that we talked about, the October 1, 2010 date, the subaward amount, the other programs under the Consolidated Plan umbrella do apply. You should contact those programs for more information. The next question we have looks like it's from Elizabeth. Would this reporting be for federal fiscal year 2009, October 1, 2009 subawards, or new subawards for fiscal year 2010? Again, we need to go back to those thresholds. You do not need to report on a subaward for 2009, as the grant between HUD and the prime awardee was executed prior to October 1, 2010. You will begin reporting on subawards for fiscal 2010 executed after October 1, 2010. Let's see. The next question we have here is, if the City of Sunrise as an entitlement community has designated the Community Development Department to administer the entitlement grant, the department has a memorandum of understanding on a public service activity with the Leisure Services Department. Does this qualify as a subaward? That's a great question. And the answer is,
well, if the Leisure Services Department is a part of Sunrise's general unit of local government, then no, this is not considered a subaward. If the Leisure Services Department was an independent entity, another public agency that is separate from the general unit of local government, then it in fact would be a subaward.
Thanks, Karen. That's a really good question. Karen, we also have a question here from Hal and Shanette, and I know that you and I talked about this, so maybe you'd be willing to take a crack at it, but it says, Hal and Shanette are both wondering about housing rehabilitation contracts made from CDBG grants.
Okay, for grants, a subaward means a legal instrument to provide support for the performance of any portion of the subsidized project or program for which you receive this award. So that's what a subaward means. It's a grant, a subaward from our grantee, our CDBG grantee, to another entity. It's not a contract. You never, under FSRS at the present time, you will not report on any contract, on any procurement action.
Great. Let's see. I think we have a couple of other questions, and if you have other ones, please keep sending them. We have some time to go through the questions here. This is kind of I was looking at FSRS and saw the term FAIN. What does FAIN mean? That's a very good question. FAIN simply means Federal Award Identification Number, FAIN. I would avoid using that terminology and just, it's the grant number, the award number. We had another question here. It's similar to the one we received before, but I'm going to go ahead and repeat it because I think it's a good question. I received my CDBG grant on April 1st, 2010, and made a sub-award on October 10th, 2010. Do I have to report in FSRS? No. You don't need to report in this case. Grantees must must only report on subawards for federal grants executed on or after October 1st, 2010. Your particular grant was executed prior to this date. Okay. Karen, before we go on to another question, there's one thing that we talked about when we were reading through the materials about those grantees with a lot of subawards, such as a state that maybe has 1,000 subawards. Is there going to be a procedure of any kind that we know of to help? Are these grantees going to have to do individual, or is there going to be some type of batch process?
No, there is going to. I don't think it's out yet, but
right.
OMB and GSA are developing a batch file. I mean, especially for those states with a large number of state grant recipients that will be considered subawards. This will be an important tool for you to use. Also, within the current system itself, you do not have to restart every report for every individual subaward with all the initial information for the prime awardee. You can pre-populate it just once for as many subawards as you're reporting on in that month. So that will cut out a lot of work. And for you all who have that many grants, just another reminder that we really encourage you to have all your subawardees register in CCR. This will not only save you data entry time, it will save you a lot of time trying to obtain that information from your subawardee.
I think the batch upload is supposed to happen in mid-November, and I know that we in the Office of Block Grant Assistance sent a couple of our larger grantees, their contact points over to GSA, again, who's administering the system, so that they would be able to test the batch upload feature, which I think is going to be very important for our larger grantees.
I agree.
Okay, Karen, now this is one thing you and I talked about. This is another question that we researched before the presentation about the difference between the address and the place of performance. Would you mind hitting on that?
Oh, I don't mind at all. Okay, and these are data elements for both the prime awardee and the sub-awardee. So for the prime awardee, this is, I think, easier than federalreporting.gov, although I have not been in that system in a few months. The address of the awardee or sub-awardee is the actual location of your administrative offices or the administrative offices of the sub-awardee. The place of performance is not a full address, and that makes it much easier for you. The place of performance is the city or county where the work is being conducted, or where most of the work is being conducted. And of course, for the prime awardee and the sub-awardee, that will be the grantee's jurisdiction. So you're asked the city or county, and you're asked the state, and of course the country.
We have a question here about what kind of reporting requirements should we mandate on our sub-awardees? The sub-awardees really need to work with you as the prime awardees to provide the data that you need. The DUNS number, the parent DUNS number, anything on executive compensation. But again, the best way to get this is for you as our prime awardees is to mandate the CCR registration. Then you'll get most of the data fields you need. Not all of them, but you'll get most of them. Then another question on the narrative description. Again, I urge everyone to really put some effort into the narrative description, because this database is going to be searchable to the public, and we're not sure at this point what the review burden is going to be on the federal agencies. And I know with federal reporting, this is a very timely conversation, because I know with federal reporting, some of the description fields, for the first time this quarter, they OMB has been requiring that there be certain things in these description fields, and they've been sending them back to the federal agencies for us to flag and call grantees. So instead of us having to do this with this new system, FSRS, just make sure that your description is very clear on what you're doing with the money, what the outcomes and objectives are, and that you don't use any confusing terms or abbreviations. And as another reminder, again, this entire system is going to be viewable by the public. So if there's any confidential information, if there's addresses, if there are people's names, awards to individuals are exempt anyway, but if there's any information that you don't want the public to see, let's make sure that we don't include that. Is that right, Karen?
Exactly. And so for the project description for our CDBG grantees, that should read something like, during the next fiscal year, we will be providing housing rehabilitation assistance, the emergency housing repairs for 100 homeowners throughout the city. We will also be providing to an anticipated 50 households for home ownership assistance, and we'll be providing services to youth that will serve approximately so many youth, and on, so they get a good idea of how you are using CDBG funds. And the same more specific description, of course, for the sub-awardee activity, that they are expanding senior facility to include another room for bingo and to accommodate more seniors during meal times. And this will increase our ability to serve seniors in our jurisdiction. Try to use numbers. Try to use, the names of the facilities. Give them a short description so they can picture the improvements you're making in your community.
Great. Just to clarify, we talked a little bit in general terms, Karen, about the disaster grantees and which ones would be covered and which ones would not be covered. I just want to make a point that at this time, the disaster recovery grantees that we know will be covered, first of all, are the 2009 awards, the $100 million awards that relate to Public Law 111212, which basically are the Kentucky State, Cranston, Rhode Island, Warwick, Rhode Island State, Memphis, Nashville, Davidson, Shelby County, and Tennessee. The reason those are covered, even though they were 2009 grants, is that the grant agreements have not been executed. So if they've not been executed yet, and it's now November 2nd, that will definitely be covered. There was another question, Karen, about going into FSRS, and we're going to have to tread lightly here because we don't have all the expertise on the actual FSRS system, but this question seems pretty basic. Go into FSRS, and I search, and I can't find anything. I can't find any of my work. I put in my DUNS number, I put in my grant award number, I don't have a match. So really, there is some guidance in FSRS on what to do if you can't find your grant. You may have entered the wrong DUNS number. I know we had this issue come up with federal reporting. You need to make sure you're entering the DUNS number that is attached to the LOCKS banking account that you use to draw down your money for the CDBG program. That is the LOCKS. That is the DUNS number that will be on the front page of your grant agreement, along with the printout on your CCR registration that will go to Fort Worth. That information will be dumped into HUD's FODS file, and that information will populate over into USA spending.
But an alternative problem there, and this isn't really a problem for you, maybe a HUD and your jurisdiction executed your grant agreement just prior to October 1, and it isn't even
That's a good point.
Covered under FSRS. So you may have to hunt around
That's a good point,
for the right reason.
That's a good point. Like the example we showed on the screen, Karen, that August 17th, that would not be required. We had a question on how often do you update FSRS? When you have a sub-award, you update our FSRS. You do one report per month, but whenever you have a sub-award, you have 1 month plus that sub-award until the end of the month.
Yes, Diane, but you only actually report on a sub-award one time, unless the amount of that sub-award changes, going up or down. But generally, and this is unlike federalreporting.gov, and that is, you're not reporting quarterly on every sub-award. You are, in general, reporting only once.
But if a grantee makes awards throughout the year, they're going to report every month. Is that right, Karen? So if I have 1,000 awards and I'm the state of Texas, let's say, and I make awards October, November, December, January. I mean, I'm reporting pretty much every month, right?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay, thanks. Okay, do we have any other questions? I'm not sure we have too many more. Let's see what we got here. We had a question here about will it be archived? Yes, we're going to archive it. We're doing 3 of these webinars due to how many grantees we have. We're doing another one tomorrow at 2 and then another one Thursday at 2. We will be the slides will be already up on Community Connections website, and one of these will be taped, and you'll be able to listen to it again if you choose to do so.
And another question we've had is whether this can be the data entry and data collection for FSRS can be charged to the CDBG admin costs, and of course the answer is yes.
Indirect costs, though, right, Karen?
Yes.
I need to remember something about that. Okay. Will FFATA apply to Section 108 loans? The Federal Register is pretty clear about that. It does not at this time. I encourage all of you, we will post that as one of our background materials. One of the most helpful documents is the Federal Register notice that came out on September 14th. That is a 3-part Federal Register issuance. It has information on DUNS numbers, CCR, and on FFATA. You'll see information there on the award terms, and you will see the exclusion for loan guarantees at this time. And keep in mind, when I say at this time, I'm thinking the door might be open later, but so far they're excluded.
Okay, and we have a question from Jared. He asks, what if we award a forgivable loan to a business? That is, you are awarding a forgivable loan even if eventually that becomes like a grant. I know what you're asking. That business is the beneficiary of, it's just like awarding a grant to an individual. You do not report it in FSRS.
Okay, I think we have time for this question. A grantee, okay, listen to this, Karen. A grantee has an award date of July 1, so we know that's not going to be covered. And the person says, acknowledges, I will have to report next year. I have subrecipients who are receiving amounts that vary from $1,000 to $15,000. The threshold is $25,000. Does that mean I don't have to report on them? The answer is yes, but remember the caveat that we went through earlier. If later those are increased, you will have to report on them later, if they're increased 25,000 or higher. Is there anything to add to that?
Exactly. No, I think you've taken care of that adequately. I mean, the amount, if you had a $15,000 award and added $10,000 to it for the same award, that it would qualify as being covered under FSRS.
But the way the scenario is provided to us now, they would not have to report between $1,000 and $15,000.
Well, right, and with an award date of July 1, she doesn't have
They're off the
that.
hook both ways.
Yeah,
okay.
Forget that.
Okay, all right, very good. Let's see if there's anything else we have here. Oh, okay. We had someone request that we go over the exceptions again who doesn't have to report, and I think we do have time to do that. Let me get to my slide. Okay. We said again, October 1, grant executed after October 1st, 2010, required. Exceptions are awards to individuals, Subawards that are considered a beneficiary, as we talked about Karen's example about a loan to a business, assistance to a business, housing rehab to an individual, right? Beneficiaries, classified information. Don't give away government secrets. Prime awardees with a gross income from all sources equaling, very important, equaling $300,000 or less in the previous tax year. So if a very small grantee can demonstrate that their gross income from all sources, not just CDBG, NSP, equals $300,000 or less in the previous tax year, they're not required to report. And that Federal Register notice of September 14th, 2010 has information on these exceptions.
That will apply to very few, if any, of our grantees.
Right. And also, the other exception is ERA. Keep in mind, this does not apply to ERA, any recovery funds at all.
Yeah, and let me just talk a little bit about the definition of the subaward again. To make the, I think the distinction between beneficiary, and the subaward for FSRS is a little confusing. The subaward that you have to report on in FSRS is an award to, let's say, a nonprofit that is assisting you in carrying out your CDBG mission. So that nonprofit is going to help you rehab houses throughout your city. This differs from being the recipient of the housing rehab. Okay, the function of the nonprofit is to help you help your low and moderate income citizens.
Karen, do we have any more questions? I'm not sure that we do.
No, I think we're about ready to wrap up the webinar.
I don't see any more questions. I really want to thank everyone for participating, and again, on the behalf of the Office of Block Grant Assistance, we sincerely appreciate all that you do every day and encourage you to review these materials, review the guidance on FSRS, review the tutorials that they have up there on the step-by-step data entry points, and we will be posting the Q&As and other materials, and we will let you know the location of those materials.